Good evening, my friends. It's Indiana Holmes here with you tonight to continue reading The Three Musketeers. And we begin tonight with chapter 48, A Family Affair. Athos had invented the phrase family affair. A family affair was not subject to the investigation of the cardinal. A family affair concerned nobody. People might employ themselves in a family affair before all the world. Therefore, Athos had invented the phrase family affair. Aramis had discovered the idea, the lackeys. Porthos had discovered the means, the diamond. D'Artagnan alone had discovered nothing. He, ordinarily the most inventive of the four, but it must be also said that the very name of Milady paralyzed him. Ah, no, we were mistaken. He had discovered a purchaser for his diamond. The breakfast at M. de Treville's was as gay and cheerful as possible. D'Artagnan already wore his uniform, for being nearly the same size as Aramis, and as Aramis was so liberally paid by the publisher who had purchased his poem as to allow him to buy everything double, he sold his friend a complete outfit. D'Artagnan would have been at the height of his wishes if he had not constantly seen Milady like a dark cloud hovering in the horizon. After breakfast, it was agreed that they should meet again in the evening at Athos's lodgings, and there finish their plans. D'Artagnan passed the day in exhibiting his musketeer's uniform in every street of camp. In the evening, at the appointed hour, the four friends met. There only remained three things to decide: what they should write to Milady's brother, what they should write to the clever person at Tours, and which should be the lackeys to carry the letters. Everyone offered his own. Athos talked about the discretion of Grimaud, who never spoke a word but when his master unlocked his mouth. Porthos boasted of the strength of Mousqueton, who was big enough to thrash 4 men of ordinary size. Aramis, confiding in the address of Bazin, made a pompous eulogium of his candidate. Finally, D'Artagnan had entire faith in the bravery of Planchet, and reminded them of the manner in which he had conducted himself in the ticklish affair at Bologna. These four virtues disputed the prize for a length of time, and gave birth to magnificent speeches, which would do to repeat here, for fear they would be deemed too long. Unfortunately, said Athos, he whom we send must possess in himself alone the four qualities united. But where is such a lackey to be found? Not to be found, cried Athos. I know it well, so take Grimaud. Take Mousqueton, take Bazin, take Planchet. Planchet is brave and shrewd. They are 2 qualities out of the 4. Gentlemen, said Aramis, the principal question is not to know which of our 4 lackeys is the most discreet, the most strong, the most clever, or the most brave. The principal thing to know is which loves money the best. What Aramis says is very sensible, replied Athos. We must speculate upon the faults of people, and not upon their virtues. Monsieur Abbé, you are a great moralist. Doubtless, said Aramis, for we not only require to be well served in order to succeed, but moreover not to fail. For in case of failure, heads are in question, not for our lackeys. Speak lower, Aramis, said Athos. That's wise, not for the lackeys, resumed Aramis, but for the master, for the masters, we may say. Are our lackeys sufficiently devoted to us to risk their lives for us? No. My faith, said D'Artagnan, I would almost answer for Planchet. Well, my dear friend, add to his natural devotedness a good sum of money, and then, instead of answering for him once, answer for him twice. Why, good God, you will be deceived just the same, said Athos, who was an optimist when things were concerned, and a pessimist when men were in question. They will promise everything for the sake of money, and on the road fear will prevent them from acting. Once taken, They will be pressed. When pressed, they will confess everything. What the devil? We are not children. To reach England, Athos lowered his voice, all France, covered with spies and creatures of the cardinal, must be crossed. A passport for embarkation must be obtained, and the party must be acquainted with English in order to ask the way to London. Really, I think the thing very difficult. Not at all, cried D'Artagnan, who was anxious the matter should be accomplished. On the contrary, I think it very easy. It would be, no doubt, parbleu, if we write to Lord de Winter about affairs of vast importance, of the horrors of the cardinal. Speak lower, said Athos. Of intrigues and secrets of state, continued D'Artagnan, complying with the recommendation. There can be no doubt we would all be broken on the wheel. But for God's sake, do not forget, as you yourself said, Athos, that we only write to him concerning a family affair, that we only write to him to entreat that as soon as Milady arrives in London, we will put it out of her power to injure us. I will write to him then, nearly in these terms. Let us see, said Athos, assuming in advance a critical look. Monsieur and dear friend. Ah, yes, dear friend to an Englishman, interrupted Athos. Well commenced. Bravo, D'Artagnan. Only with that word you would be quartered instead of being broken on the wheel. Well, perhaps. I will say then, Monsieur, quite short. You may even say, my lord, replied Athos, who stickled for propriety. My lord, do you remember the little goat pasture of the Luxembourg? Good, the Luxembourg. One might believe this is an allusion to the Queen Mother. That's ingenious, said Athos. Well then, we will put it simply, my lord. Do you remember a certain little enclosure where your life was spared? My dear D'Artagnan, you will never make anything but a very bad secretary. Where your life was spared? For shame, that's unworthy. A man of spirit is not to be reminded of such services. A benefit reproached is an offense committed. The devil, said D'Artagnan, you are unsupportable. If the letter must be written under your censure, my faith, I renounce the task. And you will do it right. Handle the musket and the sword, my dear fellow. You will come off splendidly at those two exercises. But pass the pen over to Monsieur Abbé. That's his province. Aye, aye, said Porthos. Pass the pen to Aramis, who writes these in Latin. Well, so be it, said D'Artagnan. Draw up this note for us, Aramis. But by our Holy Father the Pope, cut it short, for I shall prune you in my turn, I warn you. I ask no better, said Aramis, with that ingenious air of confidence which every poet has in himself. But let me be properly acquainted with the subject. I have heard here and there that this sister-in-law was a hussy. I have obtained proof of it by listening to her conversation with the cardinal. Lower, scarabbleu, said Athos. But, continued Aramis, the details escape me. And me also, said Porthos. D'Artagnan and Athos looked at each other for some time in the silence. At length, Athos, after serious reflection, and becoming more pale than usual, made a sign of assent to D'Artagnan, who by it understood he was at liberty to speak. Well, this is what you have to say, said D'Artagnan. My lord, your sister-in-law is an infamous woman who wished to have you killed, that she might inherit your wealth, but she could not marry your brother, being already married in France, and having been... D'Artagnan stopped, as if seeking for the word, and looked at Athos. Repudiated by her husband, said Athos. Because she had been branded, continued D'Artagnan. Bah! Cried Porthos. Impossible! What do you say? That she wanted to have her brother-in-law killed? Yes. She was married? Asked Aramis. Yes. And her husband found out that she had the fleur-de-lis on her shoulder? Cried Porthos. Yes. These 3 years had been pronounced by Athos, each with a sadder intonation. And who has seen this fleur-de-lis? Inquired Aramis. D'Artagnan and I, or rather, to observe the chronological order, I and D'Artagnan, replied Athos. And does the husband of this frightful creature still live? Said Aramis. He still lives. Are you quite sure of this? Are you quite sure of it? I am he. There was a moment of cold silence, during which everyone was affected according to his nature. This time, said Athos, first breaking the silence, D'Artagnan has given us an excellent program, and the letter must be written at once. The devil! You are right, Athos, said Aramis, and it is a rather difficult matter. The Chancellor himself would be puzzled how to write such a letter, and yet the Chancellor draws up an official report very readily. Never mind. Be silent. I will write. Aramis, accordingly, took the quill, reflected for a few moments, wrote 8 or 10 lines in charming little female hand, and then, with a voice soft and low, as if each word had been scrupulously weighed, he read the following. My lord, the person who writes these few lines had the honor of crossing swords with you in the little enclosure of the Rue de Enfer. As you have several times since declared yourself the friend of that person, he thinks it is his duty to respond to that friendship by sending you important information. Twice you have nearly been the victim of a near relative, whom you believe to be your heir because you are ignorant that before she contracted a marriage in England, she was already married in France. But the third time, which is the present, you may succumb. Your relative left La Rochelle for England during the night. Watch her arrival, for she has great and terrible projects. If you require to know positively what she is capable of, read her past history on her left shoulder. Well, now that you will do wonderfully well, said Athos. My dear Aramis, you have the pen of a Secretary of State. Lord de Winter will now be upon his guard if the letter should reach him, and even if it should fall into the hands of the cardinal, we shall not be compromised, but as the lackey who goes may make us believe he has been into London and may stop at Chanterotte, let us give him only half the sum promised, with the letter, with an agreement that he shall have the other half in exchange for the reply. Have you the diamond? Continued Athos. I have what is still better. I have the price. And D'Artagnan threw the bag upon the table. At the sound of the gold, Aramis raised his eyes, and Porthos started. As to Athos, he remained unmoved. How much in that little bag? 7,000 livres, in louis of 12 francs. 7,000 livres, cried Porthos. That poor little diamond was worth 7,000 livres? It appears so, said Athos, since here they are. I don't suppose that our friend D'Artagnan has added any in his own amount. But, gentlemen, in all this, said D'Artagnan, we do not think of the queen. Let us take some heed of the welfare of her dear Buckingham. That is the least we owe her. That's true, said Athos, but that concerns Aramis. Well, replied the latter, blushing, what must I say? Oh, that's simple enough, replied Athos. Write a second letter for that clever personage who lives at Tours. Aramis resumed his pen, reflected a little, and wrote the following lines, which he immediately submitted to the approbation of his friends. My dear cousin. Ah, said Athos. This clever person is your relative, then? Cousin German. Go on to your cousin, then, Aramis continued. My dear cousin, his Eminence, the Cardinal, whom God preserve for happiness of France and the confusion of the enemies of the kingdom, is on the point of putting an end to the heretic rebellion of La Rochelle. It is probable that the succor of the English fleet will never arrive in sight of the place. I will even venture to say that I am certain Monsieur de Buckingham will be prevented from setting out by some great event, His Eminence is the most illustrious politician of the times past, of times present, and probably of times to come. He would extinguish the sun if the sun incommoded him. Give these happy tidings to your sister, my dear cousin. I have dreamed that the unlucky Englishman was dead. I cannot recollect whether it was by steel or by poison. Only of this I am sure. I have dreamed he was dead, and you know my dreams never deceive me. Be assured, then, of seeing me soon return." "Capital!" cried Athos. "You are the king of poets, my dear Aramis. You speak like the Apocalypse, and you are as true as the gospel. There is nothing now to do but to put the address to this letter." "That is easily done," said Aramis. He folded the letter fancifully and took up his pen and wrote, "To Mademoiselle Michon, seamstress, Tours." The three friends looked at one another and laughed. They were caught. "Now," said Aramis, "you will please to understand, gentlemen, that Bazin alone can carry this letter to Tours. My cousin knows nobody but Bazin, and places confidence in nobody but him. Any other person would fail. Besides, Bazin is ambitious and learned. Bazin has read history, gentlemen. He knows that Sixtus and Fifth became pope after having kept pigs. Well, as he means to enter the church at the same time as myself, he does not despair of becoming pope in his turn, or at least a cardinal. You can understand that a man who has such views will never allow himself to be taken, or if taken, will undergo martyrdom rather than speak." "Very well," said D'Artagnan. "I consent to Bazin with all my heart, but grant me Planchet." Milady had him one day turned out of doors, with sundry blows of a good stick to accelerate his motions. Now Planchet has an excellent memory, and I will be bound that sooner than relinquish any possible means of vengeance, he will allow himself to be beaten to death. If your arrangements at Tours are your arrangements, Aramis, those of London are mine. I request then that Planchet may be chosen more particularly, as he has already been to London with me, and knows how to speak correctly. London, sir, if you please, and my master, Lord D'Artagnan. With that you may be satisfied. He can make his way, both going and returning." "In that case," said Athos, "Planchet must receive 700 livres for going, and 700 livres for coming back, and Bazin 300 livres for going, and 300 livres for returning. That will reduce the sum to 5,000 livres. We will each take 1,000 livres to be employed as seems good, and we will have a fund of 1,000 livres under the guardianship of Monsieur Abbe here for extraordinary occasions or common wants. Will that do?" "My dear Athos," said Aramis, "you speak like Nestor, who was, as everyone knows, the wisest among the Greeks." "Well then," said Athos, "it is agreed. Planchet and Bazin shall go. Everything considered, I am not sorry to retain Grimaud. He is accustomed to my ways, and I am particular. Yesterday's affair must have shaken him a little. His voyage would have upset him quite a bit." Planchet was sent for, and instructions were given to him. The matter had been named to him by D'Artagnan, who in the first place pointed out the money to him, then the glory, then the danger. "I will carry the letter in the lining of my coat," said Planchet, "and if I am taken, I will swallow it, but then will not be able to fulfill your commission," said D'Artagnan. "You will give me a copy this evening, which I shall know by heart tomorrow." D'Artagnan looked at his friends as if to say, "Well, what did I tell you?" "Now," continued he, addressing Planchet, "you have 8 days to get an interview with Lord de Winter. You have 8 days to return, in all 16 days. If on the 16th day after your departure, at 8 o'clock in the evening, you are not here, no money, even if it is to be but 5 minutes past, then, monsieur," said Planchet, "you must buy me a watch." "Take this," said Athos, with his usual careless generosity, giving him his own, "and be a good lad. Remember, if you talk, if you babble, if you get drunk, if you risk your master's head, who has so much confidence in your fidelity, and who answers for you. But remember also that if by your fault any evil happens to D'Artagnan, I will find you, wherever you may be, for the purpose of ripping up your belly." "Oh, monsieur," said Planchet, humiliated by the suspicion, and moreover terrified at the calm air of the Musketeer. "And I," said Porthos, rolling his eyes large, "remember, I will skin you alive." "Ah, monsieur!" "And I," said Aramis, with a soft, melodious voice, "remember that I will roast you at a slow fire like a savage." "Ah, monsieur!" Planchet began to weep. We will not venture to say whether it was from terror created by the threats or from tenderness at seeing four friends so closely united. D'Artagnan took his hand. "See, Planchet," said he, "these gentlemen only say this out of affection for me, but at the bottom they all like you." "Ah, monsieur," said Planchet, "I will succeed, or I will consent to be cut into quarters. And if they do not cut me in quarters, be assured that not a morsel of me will speak." It was decided that Planchet should set out the next day at 8 o'clock in the morning, in order that he may have said that he might during the night learn the letter by heart. He gained just 12 hours by this engagement. He was to be back on the 16th day by 8 o'clock in the evening. In the morning, as he was mounting his horse, D'Artagnan, who felt at the bottom of his heart a partiality for the Duke, took Planchet aside. "Listen," said he to him. "When you have given the letter to Lord de Winter, and he has read it, you will further say to him, 'Watch over his Grace Lord Buckingham, for they wish to assassinate him. But this, Planchet, is so serious and important that I have not informed my friends that I would entrust this secret to you, and for a captain's commission I would not write it.'" "Be satisfied, monsieur," said Planchet. "You will see if confidence can be placed in me." Mounted on an excellent horse, which he was to leave at the end of 20 leagues in order to take the post, Planchet set off at a gallop, his spirits a little depressed by the triple promise he made by the Musketeers, but otherwise as light-hearted as possible. Bazin set out the next day for Tours, and was allowed 8 days for performing his commission. The four friends, during the period of these 2 absences, had, as may well be supposed, the eye on the watch, the nose to the wind, and the ear on the lark. Their days were passed in endeavoring to catch all that was said, in observing the proceedings of the cardinal, and in looking out for all the couriers who arrived. More than once an involuntary trembling seized them when called upon for some unexpected service. They had, besides, to look constantly to their own proper safety. Milady was a phantom which, when it had once appeared to people, did not allow them to sleep very quietly. On the morning of the 8th day, Bazin, fresh as ever, and smiling according to custom, entered the cabaret of the Parapet, as the four friends were sitting down for breakfast, saying, "As had been agreed upon, Monsieur Aramis, the answer from your cousin." The four friends exchanged a joyful glance. Half of the work is done, it is true. However, what it is the shorter and the easier part. Aramis, blushing in spite of himself, took the letter, which was in part coarse hand, and not particular for its orthography. "Good God!" cried he, laughing, "I quite despair of my poor Michon. She will never write like Monsieur de Vautier." "What does you mean by boor Michon?" said the Swiss, who was chatting with the four friends when the letter came. "Oh, pardieu, less than nothing," said Aramis, "a charming little seamstress, whom I love dearly, and from whose hand I requested a few lines of short keepsake." "The Duville?" said the Swiss. "If she is as great a lady as her writing is large, you are a lucky fellow, Gromade." Aramis read the letter and passed it to Athos. "See what she writes to me, Athos," said he. Athos cast a glance over the epistle and dispersed all the suspicions that might have been created. Read aloud, "My cousin, my sister and I are skillful in interpreting dreams, and even entertain great fear of them. But of yours it may be said, I hope every dream is an illusion. Adieu. Take care of yourself, and act so we may, from time to time, hear of you spoken of. Marie Michon. And what dream does she mean? Asked the dragoon, who had approached during the reading. Yes, what's the dream? Said the Swiss. Well, pardieu, said Aramis. It was only this. I had a dream, and I related it to her. Yes, yes, said the Swiss. It's simple enough to tell, a dream, but I never dream. You are very fortunate, said Athos, rising. I wish I could say as much. Never, replied the Swiss, enchanted that a man like Athos could envy him anything. Never, never. D'Artagnan, seeing Athos rise, did likewise, took his arm and went out. Porthos and Aramis remained behind to encounter the jokes of the dragoon and the Swiss. As to Bazin, he went out to lay out on a truss of straw, and as he had more imagination than the Swiss, he dreamed that Aramis, having become Pope, adorned his head with a cardinal's hat. But as we have said, Bazin had not, by his fortune, removed more than a part of the uneasiness which weighed upon the four friends. The day of expectation are long, and D'Artagnan in particular would have wagered that the days were 44 hours. He forgot the necessary slowness of navigation. He exaggerated to himself the power of Milady. He credited this woman, who appeared to him the equal of a demon, with agents of supernatural as herself. At the least noise, he imagined himself about to be arrested, and that Planchet was being brought back to be confronted with himself and his friends. Still further, his confidence in the worthy Picard, at one time so great, diminished the day by day. This anxiety became so great that even extended to Aramis and Porthos. Athos alone remained unmoved, as if no danger hovered over him, and as if he breathed his customary atmosphere. On the 16th day in particular, these signs were so strong in D'Artagnan and his two friends that they could not remain quiet in one place, and wandered about like ghosts on the road by which Planchet was expected. Really, said Athos to them, you are not men but children, to let a woman terrify you so. And what does it amount to? After all, to be imprisoned. Well, but we should all be taken out of prison. Madame Boncheneux was released to be decapitated. Why? Every day in the trenches we go cheerfully to expose ourselves to worse than that, for a bullet may break a leg, and I am convinced a surgeon would give us more pain in cutting off a thigh than an executioner cutting off a head. Wait quiet, then. In 2 hours, in 4, in 6 hours, at latest, Planchet will be here. He promised to be here, and I have very great faith in Planchet, who appears to me to be a very good lad. But if he does not come, said D'Artagnan, well, if he does not come, it will be because he has been delayed, that's all. He may have fallen from his horse. He may have cut a caper from the deck. He may have traveled so fast against the wind as to have been brought on a violent carth. Ah! Gentlemen, let us reckon upon accidents. Life is a chaplet, a little miseries, which the philosopher counts with a smile. Be philosophers as I am, gentlemen. Sit down at the table and let us drink. Nothing makes the future look so bright as surveying it through a glass of Chambertin. That's all very well, replied D'Artagnan, but I am tired of fearing, when I open a fresh bottle, that the wine may have come from the cellar of Milady. You are very fastidious, said Athos. Such a beautiful woman. A woman of mark, said Porthos, with his loud laugh. Athos started, passed his hand over his brow to remove the drops of perspiration that burst forth, and rose in his turn with a nervous movement he could not repress. The day, however, passed away, and the evening came on slowly, but finally it came. The bars were filled with drinkers. Athos, who had pocketed his share of the diamond, seldom quit the parapet. He had found in Monsieur de Busigny, who, by the by, had given them a magnificent dinner, a partner worthy of his company. They were playing together as usual when 7 o'clock sounded. The patrol was heard passing to the double of the posts. At 7:30, the retreat was sounded. "We are lost," said D'Artagnan in the ear of Athos. "You mean to say we have lost," said Athos quietly, drawing 4 pistoles from his pocket, 4 pistoles from his pocket, and throwing them upon the table. "Come, gentlemen," said he, "they are beating the tattoo. Let us to bed." And Athos went out of the parapet, followed by D'Artagnan. Aramis came behind, giving his arm to Porthos. Aramis mumbled verses to himself, and Porthos, from time to time, pulled a hair or two from his mustache in a sign of despair. But all at once a shadow appeared in the darkness, the outline of which was familiar to D'Artagnan, and a well-known voice. "Monsieur, I have brought your cloak. It is chilly this evening." "Planchet!" cried D'Artagnan, beside himself with joy. "Planchet!" repeated Aramis and Porthos. "Well, yes, Planchet to be sure," said Athos. "What is there so astonishing in that? He promised to be back by 8 o'clock, and 8 is striking. Bravo, Planchet! You are a lad of your word, and if ever you leave your master, I will promise you a place in my service." "Oh, no, never," said Planchet. "I will never leave Monsieur d'Artagnan." At the same time, D'Artagnan felt that Planchet slipped a note into his hand. D'Artagnan felt a strong inclination to embrace Planchet as he had embraced him on his departure, but he feared lest this mark of affection bestowed upon his lackey in the open street might appear extraordinary to a passer-by, and he restrained himself. "I have this note," said he to Athos and to his friends. "That's well," said Athos. "Let us go home and read it." The note burned the hand of D'Artagnan. He wished to hasten their steps, but Athos took his arm and passed it under his own, and the young man was forced to regulate his pace by that of his friend. At length they reached the tent, lit the lamp, and while Planchet stood at the entrance, that the 4 friends might not be surprised, D'Artagnan, with a trembling hand, broke the seal and opened it, so anxiously expecting the letter. It contained half a line, in a hand perfectly British, and with the conciseness as perfectly Spartan. "Thank you. Be easy." D'Artagnan translated this for the others. Athos took the letter from the hands of D'Artagnan, approached the lamp and set fire to the paper, and did not let go till it was reduced to a cinder. Then, calling Planchet, he said, "Now, my lad, you may claim your 700 livres. And you did not run much risk with such a note as that." "I am not to blame for having tried every means to compress it," said Planchet. "Well," cried D'Artagnan, "tell us all about it." "Dame, that's a long job, monsieur." "You are right, Planchet," said Athos. "Besides, the tattoo has been sounded, and we should be observed if we kept a light burning much longer than the others." "So be it," said D'Artagnan. "Go to bed, Planchet, and sleep soundly." "My faith, monsieur, that will be the first time I have done so for 16 days. "And me too," said D'Artagnan. "And me too," said Porthos. "And me too," said Aramis. "Well, if you will have the truth, and me too, Athos." Chapter 49. Fatality. Meantime, Milady, drunk with passion, roaring on the deck like a lioness that has been embarked, and had been tempted to throw herself into the sea that she might regain the coast, for she could not get rid of the thought that she had been insulted by D'Artagnan, threatened by Athos, and that she had quit France without being revenged on them. This idea soon became insupportable to her at the risk of whatever terrible consequences might result to herself from it. She implored the captain to put her on the shore, but the captain, eager to escape from his false position, placed between French and English cruisers, like the bat between the mice and the birds, was in great haste to regain England, and positively refused to obey what he took for a woman's caprice, promising his passengers, who had been partially recommended to him by the cardinal, to land her if the sea and the French permitted him, at one of the ports of Brittany, either at Laurent or Brest. But the wind was contrary, the sea bad. They tacked and kept off shore 9 days after leaving the Charente. Pale with fatigue and vexation, Milady saw only the blue coasts of Fenestre appear. She calculated that to cross the corner of France and return to the Cardinal, it would take her at least 3 days. Add another day for landing, and that would make 4. And these 4 to the 9 others, that would be 13 days lost, 13 days, during which so many important events might pass in London. She reflected likewise that the Cardinal would be furious at her return, and consequently would be more disposed to listen to the complaints brought against her than to the accusations she brought against others. She allowed the vessel to pass Laurent and Brest without repeating her request to the captain, who, on his part, took care not to remind her of it. Milady therefore continued her voyage, and on the very day that Planchet embarked at Portsmouth, France, the messenger of his Eminence entered the port in triumph. All the city was agitated by an extraordinary movement. 4 large vessels, recently built, had just been launched. At the end of the jetty, his clothes richly laced with gold, glittering, as was customary with him, with diamonds and precious stones, his hat ornamented with a white feather, which drooped upon his shoulder, Buckingham was seen surrounded by a staff almost as brilliant as himself. It was one of those rare and beautiful days in winter when England remembers that there is a sun. The star of day, pale but nevertheless still splendid, was setting in the horizon, glorifying at once the heavens and the sea with bands of fire, and casting upon the towers and old houses of the city a last ray of gold, which made the windows sparkle like reflection of conflagration. Breathing that sea breeze, so much more invigorating and balsamic as the land is approached, contemplating all the power of those preparations, she was commissioned to destroy all the powers of that army which she was to combat alone. She, a woman, a few bags of gold. Milady compared herself mentally to Judith, the terrible Jewess, when she penetrated the camp of the Assyrians and beheld the enormous mass of chariots, horses, men, and arms, which a gesture of her hand was to dissipate like a cloud of smoke. They entered the roadstead, but as they drew near in order to cast anchor, a little cutter, looking like a coast guard formidably armed, approached the merchant vessel and dropped into the sea a boat which directed its course to the latter. The boat contained an officer, a mate, and 8 rowers. The officer alone went on board, where he was received with all the deference inspired by the uniform. The officer conversed a few instants with the captain, gave him several papers, of which he was the bearer, to read, and upon the order of the merchant captain, the whole crew in the vessel, both passengers and sailors, were called upon deck. When this species of summons was made, the officer inquired aloud the point of the brig's departure, its route, its landings, and all its questions. The captain replied without difficulty and without hesitation. Then the officer began to pass in review all the people, one after another, and stopping when he came to Milady, surveyed her very closely, but without addressing a single word to her. He then returned to the captain, said a few words to him, and, as if from that moment the vessel was under his command, he ordered a maneuver, which the crew executed immediately. Then the vessel resumed its course, still escorted by a little cutter, which sailed side by side with it, menacing it with mouths of its 6 cannon. The boat followed in the wake of the ship, a speck near the enormous mass. During the examination of Milady by the officer, as may well be imagined, Milady on her part was not less scrutinizing in her glances. But however great was the power of this woman with her eyes of flame In reading the hearts of those whose secrets she wished to divine, she met this time with a countenance of such impassivity that no discovery followed her investigation. The officer who had stopped in front of her and studied her with so much care might have been 25 or 26 years of age. He was of pale complexion, with clear blue eyes rather deeply set. His mouth, fine and well cut, remained motionless in its correct lines. His chin, strongly marked, denoted that strength of will which the ordinary Britannic type denotes mostly nothing but obstinacy. A brow a little receding, as is proper for poets, enthusiasts, and soldiers, was scarcely shaded by short thin hair, which, like the beard which covered the lower part of his face, was a beautiful deep chestnut color. When they entered the port, it was already night. The fog increased the darkness, and formed round the stern lights and lanterns of the jetty a circle like that which surrounds the moon when the weather threatens to become rainy. The air they breathed was heavy, damp, and cold. Milady, that woman so courageous and firm, shivered in spite of herself. The officer desired to have Milady's packages pointed out to him, and ordered them to be placed in the boat. When this operation was complete, he invited her to descend by offering her his hand. Milady looked at this man and hesitated. "Who are you, sir?" asked she. "Who has the kindness to trouble yourself so particularly on my account?" "You may perceive, madame, by my uniform, that I am an officer in the English Navy," replied the young man. "But is it custom for officers of the English Navy to place themselves at the service of their female compatriots when they land in a port of Great Britain, and carry their gallantry so far as to conduct themselves ashore?" "Yes, madame, it is the custom, not from gallantry, but from prudence, that in time of war foreigners should be conducted to particular hotels in order that they may remain under the eye of the government until full information can be obtained about them." These words were pronounced with the most exact politeness and the most perfect calmness. Nevertheless, they had not the power of convincing Milady. "But I am not a foreigner, sir," said she, with an accent as pure as ever was heard between Portsmouth and Manchester. "My name is Lady Cleric, and this measure is general, madame, and you will seek in vain to evade it." "I will follow you then, sir." Accepting the hand of the officer, she began the descent on the ladder, at the foot of which the boat waited. The officer followed her. A large cloak was spread at stern. The officer requested her to sit down upon this cloak, and placed himself beside her. "Row," said he to the sailors. The 8 oars fell at once into the sea, making but a single sound, giving but a single stroke, and the boat seemed to fly over the surface of the water. In 5 minutes they gained the land. The officer leaped to the pier and offered his hand to the Milady. A carriage was in waiting. "Is this carriage for us?" asked Milady. "Yes, madame," replied the officer. "The hotel, then? It's far away?" "At the other end of town." "Very well," said Milady, and she resolutely, and entered the carriage. The officer saw that the baggage was fastened carefully behind the carriage, and the operation ended. He took his place beside Milady and shut the door. Immediately, without any order being given or his place of destination indicated, the coachman set off at rapid pace and plunged into the streets of the city. So strange a reception naturally gave Milady ample matter for reflection. So, seeing that the young officer did not seem at all disposed for conversation, she reclined in her corner of the carriage, and one after the other passed in review of all the surmises which presented themselves to her mind. At the end of the quarter of an hour, however, surprised at the length of the journey, she leaned forward toward the door to see whither she was being conducted. Houses were no longer to be seen. Trees appeared to be in darkness, like great black phantoms chasing one another. Milady shuddered. "But we are no longer in the city, sir," said she. The young officer preserved silence. "I beg you to understand, sir, I will go no farther unless you tell me whither you are taking me." This threat brought no reply. "Oh, this is too much," cried Milady. "Help! Help!" No voice replied to hers. The carriage continued to roll on with rapidity. The officer seemed a statue. Milady looked at the officer with one of those terrible expressions peculiar to her countenance, and which so rarely failed their effect. Anger made her eyes flash in the darkness. The young man remained immovable. Milady tried to open the door in order to throw herself out. "Take care, madame," said the young man coolly. "You will kill yourself in jumping." Milady reseated herself, foaming. The officer leaned forward, looked at her in his turn, and appeared surprised to see that face, just before so beautiful, distorted with passion and almost hideous. The artful creature at once comprehended that she was injuring herself by allowing him thus to read her soul. She collected her features, and, in complaining voice, said, "In the name of heaven, sir, tell me, if it is to you, if it is to your government, if it is to an enemy, I am to attribute the violence that is done to me." "No violence will be offered to you, madame, and what happens to you is the result of a very simple measure, which we are obliged to adopt with all who land in England." "Then you don't know me, sir?" "It is the first time I have had the honor of seeing you, and on your honor you have no cause of hatred against me." "None, I swear to you." There is so much serenity, coolness, mildness, even in the voice of the young man, that Milady felt reassured. At length, after a journey of nearly an hour, the carriage stopped before an iron gate, which closed on an avenue leading to a castle, severe in form, massive and isolated. Then, as the wheels rolled over a fine gravel, Milady could hear a vast roaring, which she at once recognized as the noise of the sea dashing against some steep cliff. The carriage passed under two arched gateways, and at length stopped in a court large, dark, and square. Almost immediately the door of the carriage was opened, and the young man sprang lightly out and presented his hand to Milady, who leaned upon it, and in her turn alighted with tolerable calmness. "Still, then, I am a prisoner?" said Milady, looking around her, and bringing back her eyes with most gracious smile to the young man. "But I feel assured it will not be for long," added she. "My own conscience and your politeness, sir, are guarantees of that." However flattering this compliment, the officer made no reply, but drawing from his belt a little silver whistle, such as boatswains use in ships of war, he whistled 3 times, with 3 different modulations. Immediately several men appeared, who unharnessed the smoking horses, and put the carriage into the coach-house. Then the officer, with the same calmness, politeness, invited the prisoner into the house. She, with a still smiling countenance, took his arm, and passed with him under a low arched door, which, by a vaulted passage, lighted only at the farther end, led to a stone staircase around an angle of stone. They then came to a massive door, which, after the introduction into the lock of a key which the young man carried with him, turned heavily upon its hinges, and disclosed the chamber destined for Milady. With a single glance the prisoner took in the apartment and its minutest details. It was a chamber whose furniture was at once appropriate for a prisoner or a free man, and yet bars at the windows and outside bolts at the door decided the question in favor of the prison. In an instant all strength of mind of this creature, though drawn from the most vigorous sources, abandoned her. She sank into a large easy-chair, with her arms crossed, her head lowered, and expecting every instant to see a judge enter to interrogate her. But no one entered except 2 or 3 marines, who brought her trunks and packages, deposited them in a corner, and retired without speaking. The officer superintended all of these details with the calmness Milady had constantly seen in him, never pronouncing a word himself, and making himself obeyed by a gesture of his hand or a sound of his whistle. It might have been said that between this man and his inferiors spoken language did not exist, or had become useless. At length Milady could hold no longer. She broke the silence. "In the name of heaven, sir," cried she, "what means all this passing? Put an end to my doubts. I have courage enough for any danger I can foresee, for every misfortune which I understand. Where I am, and where am I? And why am I here? If I am free, why are these bars and these doors? If I am a prisoner, what crime have I committed? You are here in the apartment destined for you, madame. I received orders to go and take charge of you on the sea, and to conduct you to this castle. This order, I believe, I have accomplished with the exactness of a soldier, but also with the courtesy of a gentleman. There terminates, at least to the present moment, the duty I had to fulfill toward you, and the rest concerns another person." "And who is this person?" asked Milady warmly. "Can you tell me his name?" At the moment, a great jingling of spurs was heard on the stairs. Some voices passed and faded away, and the sound of a single footstep approached the door. "That person is here, madame," said the officer, leaving the entrance open, and drawing himself up in an attitude of respect. At the same time the door opened. A man appeared on the threshold. He was without hat, carried a sword, and flourished a handkerchief in his hand. Milady thought she recognized the shadow in the gloom. She supported herself with one hand upon the arm of the chair, and advanced her head as if to meet a certainty. The stranger advanced slowly, and as he advanced, after entering into the circle of a light projected by the lamp, Milady involuntarily drew back. Then, when she had no longer any doubt, she cried in a state of stupor, "What? My brother, is that you?" "Yes, my fair lady," replied Lord de Winter, making a bow, half courteous, half ironical. "It is I, myself." "But this castle, then, is mine? This chamber is yours. I am, then, your prisoner?" "Nearly so, but this is a frightful abuse of power." "No high-sounding words. Let us sit down and chat quietly, as brother and sister ought to do." Then, turning toward the door, and seeing that the young officer was waiting for his last orders, he said, "All is well. I thank you. Now leave us, Mr. Felton." And that, my friends, is the end of chapter 49. And that will be all for this evening and for this week. I will see you all again on Monday. So until then, have a wonderful weekend. Love to you all. This has been Indiana Holmes. Good night.
Please hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the notifications button. Thank you very much.